Good afternoon. We've got 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get things going with the webinar. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and we are very pleased this afternoon to have with us Amelia Mansfield of Burton Planning, who will be providing a webinar on a course overview of the walking school bus training. This is provided as a way to just give you basic information on what you can expect if you were to request this course through the Active Transportation Academy. The courses are provided at no cost, and I know that Amelia will provide you information in her presentation about how to apply for a session or sessions if you'd like that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Amelia. The one last thing I'll mention is that while we're on the webinar, I do have everyone muted. At the end, I'll open up your phone line for questions. If you would like to ask questions during the webinar, though, there is a chat pod on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and you can enter your questions there, and I will read them off to her during the presentation. Amelia? I've got you unmuted. I know that she's on here because we practiced this a little earlier, so. Well, while we're waiting for her to get the audio portion figured out, I will share with you that through our Active Transportation Academy, there are other courses besides the one that she'll be talking about today. And after the webinar is finished today, we will be providing a link to hopefully a recording of this webinar. And if we're successful with the recording of it, I'll also have links to some of the other previously recorded webinars in case you're interested. So, Amelia, you're there? Might need to just ditch the headphone set and go back to the other way. Let's see if that helps. It used to be that we'd have issues where we couldn't get the background noise to stop, and now I've figured that part out. But sometimes we have issues with the actual audio for the presenters. So right now it says that we've got your audio pause on hold. Do you are you trying to use the microphone portion, or are you trying to just use the audio through the computer? You can go ahead and stop presenting if you'd like to in order to chat with us through the chat pod. So that way we know what's going on and can work through this real quick. Well, while Amelia is working through those issues, I know we also have Kim Burton from Burton Planning on the line, and I'm going to go ahead and make her a presenter and put her on the spot and ask her to go ahead and start pitch hitting with this topic. Are you okay with that, Kim?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Okay,
I'm glad
great.
you were on the line. So,
yeah,
well,
yeah. Let me.
I think Amelia
sure
just took the presentation down. So
yeah, I'm sure she's working to troubleshoot this. So no worries. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Can you all hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what happened, but I had to stop being in presenter mode. So let me try this again.
Okay. As long as we don't lose you on the audio, then I'll mute Kim back and you can go ahead and take off with the webinar. That gave our folks who were a couple minutes after 1 a little more time to get on here. So I'm sure it worked out for everyone.
Okay. Can you still hear me now, Victoria?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Well, Kim, I'm going to go ahead and mute you back.
All right.
Thanks. Okay. It's all yours, Amelia.
It comes without some sort of technical difficulty, so everyone. Thanks for bearing with us. So again, my name is Amelia Mansfield. I am here today to give you an overview of the through ODOT's LTAP program. I'm going to talk to you about the full course learning outcomes that you would realize if you were to sign up for the crossing guard training. And then I'm going to highlight topics from the walking school bus training. I'm going to highlight topics from that. That way you can get an understanding of what the trainees you invite to participate in the training might hear about during the 4-hour course. And then we'll talk about how to apply as well. So again, my name is Amelia Mansfield, Planning Manager with Burton Planning. I have a few different roles with the Active Transportation Academy, and today I am here as a course instructor to give you some information on what we put into the course when we developed it. So the Active Transportation Academy, some of you are probably already familiar with, but in case you aren't, we just wanted to let you know and reiterate that it's here to offer training to help you and your communities reach your active transportation related goals. As Victoria mentioned, all of the trainings and workshops are free throughout Ohio. And local jurisdiction is welcome to apply. This could be everything from schools to school districts to health departments to planning departments, engineering departments, you name it. And if chance you are not representing a local jurisdiction, we encourage you to reach out to one in your area and partner with them to bring it to your community. We do offer professional development credits, both for planners and for engineers, and then we also provide a certificate of completion. That way, if you are a professional organization that allows self-reporting credits, you have a form that you're able to provide to claim that you participated in the 4 or 8 hour course. So if you go to ODOT's webpage and navigate to the planning subpage, then to LTAP ETA, or go through that link that's down there below, you'll be able to get more information on the Active Transportation Academy, as well as outlines and information about different types of trainings that you might be interested in bringing to your community. Victoria will make the presentation available afterwards, so you'll be able to get to that link directly then. So this used to be called the Safe Routes Academy, but we've recently rebranded it to reflect a broader offering of courses. So I think a lot of you have probably heard of the Safe Routes Academy before. This is the same thing, just bigger. So our new courses that we've launched this year are community traffic calming programs, walk and bike audits, and health and equity in transportation. All of those are 4-hour courses, and we have a participant group that has ranged from school districts to health professionals to engineers and planners and mayors even. So this is quite a broad-reaching level of interest. We have train the trainer courses, and so that is where the walking school bus fits in, but we also have adult school crossing guard training, Girls in Gear, which is all about empowering young women to and be safe and active pedestrians and cyclists, and then conducting a school walk audit. These are courses where we are able to get out if the weather is conducive and actually practice some of the techniques, and so it's definitely not a snoozer. I'm sure whoever participates will be fully engaged. We also have some of our training and implementation program courses. Our Safe Routes to School lesson plans course is a full 8 hours. We have our Safe Routes to School travel plan development course, which is a little bit shorter. Infrastructure implementation And then incorporating safe routes to school into wellness, school and community policy and planning, and then safety and active transportation, school and community planning. So these typically are school districts, but they also do fully partner with the local municipalities to get planners and engineers and local decision makers involved as well. Soon, we're going to have our crossing guard training online on demand. So if you weren't able to bring one to your community or weren't able to attend one, you'll be able to do it on your own time. So stay tuned for more information on that when it becomes available. We'll be offering this fall Complete Streets implementation, active transportation, and Vision Zero action plan. So all of these different topics are brought to you because we've heard from you that you're interested in learning more about them and training your local leaders and professionals and advocates on them. So without further ado, we will now talk a little bit about the course overview for the walking school bus training. So like Victoria said, we bring these course overview webinars to you. That way we can spark your interest about bringing these to your community and have you get a better understanding of exactly what we'll cover. So understand that as we go through this, this is not all of the slides. I'm going to gloss over a lot of things because this training is normally 4 hours long. And then we also want to make sure that you bringing the training to your community don't have to hear it twice, that you'll be excited to be a part of that training as well when we come to you. So the learning outcomes for the walking school bus training are listed here. Basically, the intention of this is how do you bring a walking school bus to your community, to your school district, to your school, to your street, whatever the case might be. Plan for it. How do you make sure it's going to be successful? How do you modify it as we go? What are some of the common barriers and challenges to walking in general? That way, as you're trying to start a walking school bus or walking school bus program, you're able to communicate with the people that might be concerned about what that means for them and their children and students. So for those of you who might just be wondering in general, what is a walking school bus or a bike train? This is where students are accompanied by adults, either to walk or to bike a route to school. And this can vary in frequency. It could be a monthly event. It could be a weekly or even a daily event. It just depends on interest and capacity. It could be organized, so it could just be a set of families on a street saying, hey, let's do this once in a while. We'll text when we want to do it. It could be highly organized, where you actually have a volunteer who leads it and manages it, and there's a schedule, and it's highly organized. There's also bicycle trains, which are similar, and as I'm talking about walking school bus today, know that it's synonymous with bike train. Everything that we're talking about with regard to walking could also be applied to biking. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to say walking throughout the rest of the presentation today. So bicycle trains are best suited for older elementary school children, and we would talk more about why this is in the training itself. So the history of the walking school bus is something else that we feel is really important to talk about. It's interesting, but it also sets the stage for why are we even talking about something that organized like this. Don't children walk to school normally? Well, I think we probably all know that the answer is no. They show, and anecdotally we know that children are walking less frequently to school. So sometimes it's helpful to understand the background of it. So there is a long history starting all the way back in Australia, and we get into some of the details of that in the training as well. We're able to share some news stories from around the United States that talk about, and even from around Ohio, that talk about walking school bus programs being kicked off, and understanding that it's not only important to start the walking school buses, but to keep them going through community support, and sometimes having local media involved and touting the benefits of it is really important. We see so much negative news that it's helpful when we see the positive things. And so there are a lot of different walking school buses out there, and so we're able to talk about the history of them as well, and you're able then to see how it might apply to your community. No two are alike, and that's an important thing to. So you might be wondering, how do we even know if and when it's the right time to consider a walking school bus? So in general, they've been gaining popularity among school districts for a bunch of reasons. One is that concern of safety. You hear a lot of family members, the adults in the families saying, we're just concerned about our children's safety, whether it has to do with traffic concerns of them getting hit by a car or crime concerns. Children being abducted or what have you, having them walk in numbers can be a little bit more comfortable for the adults in the family. There's also a push for children to be more active, knowing that a lot of kids these days aren't getting their exercise quotas that are recommended by national health organizations. Also, the school districts to save money and change different priorities when it comes to how the children are getting to school. So if you have more children walking or biking to school, presumably you would need buses. In the training, we get into some local case studies throughout Ohio. And so, for example, if you were in the Central Ohio area, we would focus on a case study from your area. There is one in Pickerington. If you are from an area where there has never been a walking school bus that we have documentation on, we just share some other examples from across Ohio. And hopefully that enables all of the trainees to see that this does apply to my community. This isn't just in LA. This isn't just in a nice warm state like Florida. It can happen here in Ohio as well. So in Pickerington, they are unique because they, one, involved many schools. It wasn't just a one school situation. They beef up their program by including celebrity walkers. You'll have to chime into the training and have it in your community to hear about who those might be. But they also integrate their walking school bus into their transportation planning activities. So this comes down to understanding how this will affect traffic, congestion, the need for different modes of transportation to get the children to school. How does this affect the parents and the guardians who need to drop off or pick up their kids, etc. We also like to talk about the benefits of a walking school bus. Again, this is helpful just for general knowledge, but if you're having a little bit of trouble of speaking to your community about why this might be needed, making it have a positive spin can be really helpful in a lot of regards. So being able to talk about the benefits is something that's really useful. So here you'll see a list of some of them that we've already talked about. Some of the ones we haven't talked about are building a sense of community and the social element. So a lot of times we see communities being very separated of, not as many people hanging out on their front porches, people not necessarily knowing their neighbors, and this can have a very comprehensive effect, whether or not it's a household with children, whether or not it's an older adult that is walking by every day. It definitely builds that sense of place and that sense of community. We haven't talked about air quality either, and so for those of you who are part of the transportation or environmental professional world, you'll know that there is a lot of push to reduce idling of vehicles, to reduce congestion of vehicles, because it diminishes our air quality, and especially around schools with children who have breathing disorders such as asthma, it can really be a big issue. And so if you have more people walking, theoretically less people driving, the air quality will be better surrounding the schools. And then another one that I found to be especially interesting is getting into some data about research that's been done on the benefits of physical activity and walking and biking to school and how that affects the cognition and academic achievement of children and their behavior in general. So the next thing we talk about in the training is how to set up a walking school bus program. And so there are 9 steps that we go through, and you can see them here. We're able to share with the people in the training what these steps might be, and then throughout we do activities. So For people who learn better by actually doing, activities are really helpful. And for those people who might need to meet some new potential partners, those who are in the room working on these activities together oftentimes build some kind of relationship they didn't have before. And so there are a lot of benefits in the training itself, doing these activities that relate back to all of the steps of creating a walking school bus program. So the first step, figuring out, is a walking school bus right for you. And so we go into some different tools and resources that you're able to use, some questions that you might want to ask, and it can be really interesting to hear from your counterparts who are in the training as well what the answers to these questions might be. So then the second step that we go into is, okay, we know that it's the right thing for you, so we're going to move along and say, okay, what kind of program structure is best for my community or my school district? And so this goes back to that differentiation that I started off with of the formal school buses versus the informal. And so understanding, what your capacity might be, what kind of local leaders or volunteers you have available, data do you have available, do you have the ability to set specific meeting times and communication chains and things like that, or is it something a little bit less formal that you just want to educate your school families and households about so that they could then do it themselves? Once you've chosen your program structure, we go on to talking about identifying a steering committee. And this would most likely be for the more formalized walking school bus programs, or to do some of this work if you were doing something less formal as well. So the steering committee, if you're working, you're really familiar with this concept. This involves children and a school doesn't mean we don't do a steering committee. So whatever you want to call it, it's really helpful to have this support throughout the whole planning process so that it doesn't weigh all on your shoulders, and so that you can also get the input from the people who actually would be most impacted by it. So we go through who you might want to include. We talk a little bit about your community and specifically if there are others who aren't on this list who might be important to include, or if some of these people don't exist in your community, how do you fill in the gaps then to make sure that that sort of topic is represented. So then we talk about a smaller planning team. So we have a larger steering committee. They need to do the work. They need to set up the actual walking school bus program itself. So we talk about how we recommend it being a smaller group. We talk about who that might be from the steering committee or elsewhere. We talk about mapping routes. We talk about recruiting volunteers. What does that look like? This gets into a lot of detail because especially when you're working with children, we want to make sure that they're going to be safe with their adults that they're walking to school with. So there needs to be background checks. There needs to be things that are a little bit more detailed than they might be otherwise. How do we manage volunteers? How do we market the program? And then how do we run the day-to-day activities of the program or the month-to-month activities of the program, however frequent your walking school bus might be? Talk about how to recruit leaders and volunteers. Some of you are experts in this, and so if you're a part of the training, we definitely like to have it be conversational and have you chime in as the experts on different topics. So this is a place where that would happen. Go through saying, who do you ask, where do you ask, and then what kind of necessary qualities are we looking for in the leaders and volunteers? And this goes back to that safety of our children is the main point of this, so we want to make sure that the people who are leading and volunteering are mature, responsible, and reliable. We want to make sure that roles are clear as well, and so we provide some guidance on the three different buckets of roles here, but again, based on your community, they could be different, so we talk about that in more detail in the activities and in the presentation during the training. We also go through different forms and ways of recruiting volunteers and leaders. This is because people want to know, how do others do it? And so we go through several examples that are everything from very detailed to more bare bones. That way you can see that no matter what capacity or interest you have in being super detailed and comprehensive versus being a little bit more loose in this, there are templates out there. You don't have to create it anew. I know everyone is usually really happy to hear about. For those of us who might have a background in transportation planning or just like looking at maps, the route identification step can be really fun, and it can also be really tricky. And so that's why we focus a chunk of the training on this. So there are different sub-steps, and we make sure that we break these down and go through them in detail, and we do an activity that's specifically focused on identifying potential routes, assessing them, mapping them. How do we figure out, once we've mapped them, really are the best routes, and how do we modify them if needed? We talk about the data that you need. So for example, where do students live with relation to the school or the schools that you want to involve in this program? You need the address of each student, you need the grade level of them, we need the name of the school they attended, and we talk about other data that you might want to have available to you in order to identify those potential routes. We also talk about then mapping them. So how do we map them? If you have someone in your organization who has the ability to do this on a computer program, that's great. If you need to do it by hand, we can talk about the ways you can do that as well, either by using Google Maps on your computer or doing a hand-drawn map. But we make sure to get into that. Again, just to have everyone who's at the training feel comfortable with this and know that you don't have to have all of the bells and whistles in order to make it work. It can be very rudimentary. So ultimately, we understand our mapping, whether it looks as fancy as this or not, who the target students are that would be eligible to walk a reasonable distance of about a mile or less to go to school every day. And then that plays into recruiting them to be a part of the walking school bus. We go through then mapping the chosen routes, identifying the students who might be interested in participating, figuring out if there are volunteers that are available for those areas. Then we talk about a walk audit. And so when I was detailing the Active Transportation Academy training courses, there were two of them that talked about walk audits, one having to do with schools, one in general having to do with walk audits and bike audits. And so this is like a mini version of that, of making the trainees in the course understand exactly what goes into a walk audit, what is it, what's the purpose of it, and then how do we use the data we get from it. And so basically the point of it is to understand if routes that you're choosing for your walking school bus are safe, convenient, and of a distance that it's comfortable for children to walk. So one of the activities we like to do, which is a real hit for whatever reason, is the what's wrong with this picture activity. And so I just have a few examples here, but we go through a lot of them, and it's just more of like everyone in the room can shout out what's wrong with it. It's kind of like those photo hunts. But we do this as a way of demonstrating what you might be looking for on a walk audit as you're taking a look at the routes you're identifying for the walking school bus. That go out on the street in your community during this training, since it's only 4 hours long, but you can get an idea. So what's wrong with this picture? Well, there it is, the sidewalk ends, and on the sidewalk would have to go into the street, which isn't very safe. This one, well, there's a car obstructing the sidewalk. This is more of a behavioral thing, but it's still something that's worth noting. This photo, what's wrong with that? There's probably a few things. The sidewalk entrance here at the bottom is a little bit off-centered from the crosswalk itself, and then once you get to the other side, how do you get onto the sidewalk again? There's a tree and a utility pole. Maybe this isn't the best route to take children on. This one, it's just poorly maintained crosswalk. What's wrong with this picture? This is my favorite because it's a trick question. This is a favorable. There's nothing really wrong with it. But again, being able to point to both situations that are not ideal, but then also being able to point to best practices of what you might want to strive for when you're choosing a route for children to walk to school. So we also get into talking about barriers to walking and biking. If you've participated in any of the other Active Transportation Academy courses, we talk about this a lot. There's a long history to barriers to walking and biking that are relevant to all of our trainings. And it's also just important for us to remind ourselves about these. But there's a long laundry list of them. We go into more detail about what they are, and in a lot of cases we're able to throw in local examples from the community that you're participating in the training, how it applies directly to you. So then after we've understood how do we assess the potential routes, we actually identify them. So we talk about different mapping resources if you don't have access in the entity that you're a part of. We talk about specifically for your community, if we know ahead of time resources that are available to you, we'll customize this part of the presentation for that. And then we're able to take a look at some online resources as well. That way you get a little bit more familiar with that. Talk about marketing your walking school bus program. I think we all know that no program in any regard for any topic is complete without marketing it. So we go into some details on that, again, showing a bunch of different examples, both from across the nation and from Ohio in general. That way you're able to see what others have done and know that you can be very, very basic about it, but you can also be very detailed. And how does that apply to your community? We talk about different methods, and again, we go into detail about a lot of these. We're able to discuss amongst the group at the training who might have access to certain things versus others, and that's another place where those relationships can be built. Talk about kicking off your program, and so this goes into marketing, but also goes beyond that. So everything from educating the students on how this is going to work for them, to organizing the volunteers and the leaders and planning events that keep everyone interested, and local businesses and media and family members as well. The last step we go into is talking about program and then reevaluating. So knowing that there's always room for improvement, but we go into detail about how exactly do you evaluate the program? What kind of resources does it take, both from a staff perspective or a volunteer perspective and a time perspective to do this, and how do you do it effectively? And then once you understand what could be improved or what worked really well, what do you do with that information? I think that's also a big emphasis point is how do you make your walking school bus program a part of your community's culture or your school's culture? And so we go through some different ways to make that happen. This can be everything from going back to what we had talked about with scheduling regular events to incorporating this into transportation planning efforts with your school district or with your local planning and engineering departments. It could be with your local fire department as well. We talk about different national and international events that you can your community so that they can get a better feel for the walking school bus and how it plays into their culture. Talking about setting up different incentive programs. So how do you make a child want to do this? How do you make the guardian or the parent interested in encouraging their child to do this? So things like setting up a frequent walker program. And then even working with the local schools and the school district to incorporate pedestrian themes into their curriculum. And I know this can be a tricky thing when curriculums are pretty tightly set, but we do go into resources about where you can pull from and how do you make this a part of math and science and health and social studies and all of the different types of courses. also talk about sources, both national and across the state. This is also a place where if there are any local examples, we would customize the training to fit you. We want to make sure that everyone knows that there are some just basic go-to places for walking school bus resources, which I think makes life a little bit easier when you aren't having to worry about Googling for hours to try to find the resources. They're just right here, very simple. The ones that we like to always tout are ODOT's Safe Routes to School program, the bikeohio.gov website, and the National Center for Safe Routes to School has a lot of information about this on there. And all of this stuff is tailored not only to schools and school districts, but also to planners and engineers and public health professionals and police officers and local advocates as well. So you might be wondering what the full course agenda is. It's not much different than what we just went through, but knowing that we go through everything from, again, the learning outcomes to what is a walking school bus, what are the benefits of it, how do I set it up in my community, how do I make it a part of my community's culture, and then what kind of resources are available to me. And I was remiss to mention that not only resources as an information, but also if there are funding pots available that we know are applicable to you and your community, then we make sure to talk about those as well. And throughout the whole thing, like I mentioned, we do a lot of different activities. That way, when you leave the training, you feel like you have something that's customized to you, you know what your next steps might be, and then ultimately, we hope that you set up a walking school bus program in your community. Wondering, how do I apply for a course? And so this applies to the walking school bus training as well as all of the others that I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar. So you can go to the Active Transportation Academy webpage, and there's a form on there. And all we ask is that you commit to at least 15 participants and have a space for the training. This course in general, the walking school bus course, is only 4 hours long, so that can be a little bit simpler for you to attract people to come, and then knowing that that doesn't fall over a meal, and so you don't have to worry about organizing that. But we're happy to help you in recruiting and coordinating with nearby communities. Again, like I've mentioned a few times, it's not just about instructors talking at you. It's about all of you who are at the course meeting one another and collaborating and learning something new and walking out the door from that training knowing what are we going to do next and who are we going to do it with. And so a lot of times it's really easy for us to think about those in our own community or in our own office as the ones that we would invite. But it can be really beneficial if we work with our neighbors as well in other communities and different departments and different sectors to try to make it be a little bit more comprehensive and robust when it comes to the different views that are presented. So at this point, I think we'll open it up to questions. I'll hand it back over to Victoria so she can manage that part. But thank you for being interested in this. And on behalf of my fellow instructors and myself, I just want to say we're really excited to bring this to your community and any of the other trainings as well.
Thank you, Amelia. We had one comment in the chat pod during the presentation about how walking school buses can also improve attendance and reduce tardiness. So there's a couple of extra selling points. So
Excellent.
We appreciate that comment. And I did place a link in the chat pod that takes them to the Active Transportation Academy page. And there they can find more information not only on this course but the other courses. I'm going to go through and unmute everyone's phone line now. So if you have a party going on in the background, you might want to tell them to hold it down. But that way you can actually ask questions of Amelia. Anyone who's got their phone line available, I'm unmuting it. Kate, I think you have yourself on pause for some reason, so I can't do anything with that. If you take yourself off of pause, I can unmute you then, but everyone else is unmuted. So if you have questions concerning the walking school bus or really any of the other classes, please feel free to go ahead and ask those at this time. Okay. It doesn't sound like we have any questions right now, but I know that you've provided Amelia your contact information, and we also have given them links to the application, and they can definitely feel free to reach out with any additional questions. We do have a number of sessions that are booking up into the fall. So if you are looking to book still this fall, I would recommend getting your application in sooner rather than later. There was actually one request that came in while we were on the webinar itself. So it's important to get your plans in place and move forward with those requests, because the dance card fills up rather quickly for these grant funded courses. So one last chance for questions. Going once? Going twice? Okay, we're good. Thank you so much for your time on the webinar today. Amelia did a great job. And as always, as long as the recording was good, we will be sending out a link to the recording afterwards. So thank you everyone for joining us today.